Weld tabs, requirement clarified. Let's finish up our discussion of the major Clause 7 changes by looking at weld tabs. This is another area where the 2025 edition makes the requirement considerably more explicit. In the 2020 edition, the code required welds to be terminated in a manner that ensured a sound weld, and it stated that weld tabs were to be used whenever necessary. That left some judgment as to exactly when a weld tab was required. The 2025 language is much more direct. Welds have to be both started and terminated in a manner that ensures sound welds, and weld tabs are required at the ends of CJP groove weld joints, unless one of the specific exemptions in Section 7.3.2 applies. The purpose is straightforward. The tab extends the joint preparation and allows the start and termination of the weld to occur outside the designed weld joint. Any problems associated with starting or stopping the weld can therefore occur on the tab rather than within the required weld itself. So the significant change here is the language. Instead of using weld tabs whenever they're considered necessary, the 2025 edition establishes them as the default requirement for CJP groove weld joints and then tells us when we can omit them. New weld tab exemptions. The other major addition is a specific list of situations where weld tabs are not required. AWS gives us 8 exemptions. These include weld terminations at weld access holes, certain terminations at stiffener and continuity plates, beam and web doubler plates, and locations where the physical geometry simply doesn't permit the use of a weld tab. There's also an exemption for joints in material 5/16 of an inch or 8 millimeters and thinner, although that exemption does not apply to transversely loaded butt joints. Weld tabs can also be omitted when the design specifically excludes the weld termination area from the required design length and for bearing stiffeners. Finally, the engineer can approve an exemption. When a weld tab isn't required, AWS also gives us some direction on how to handle the termination. The weld end can be cascaded for a distance of up to 1 weld size, or another appropriate termination method can be used. This is useful language because we're no longer left simply deciding whether a tab is necessary. The code now identifies specific conditions where omission of the weld tab is permitted. Weld tab removal requirements. The requirements for removing weld tabs haven't changed significantly. For statically loaded non-tubular structures, weld tabs do not have to be removed unless the engineer requires their removal. For cyclically loaded non-tubular structures, it's a different situation. The weld tabs have to be removed after the weld has been completed and cooled, and the ends of the weld have to be finished smooth and flush with the edges of the adjoining parts. The requirements for finishing the ends of butt joints are also essentially carried forward from the 2020 edition. We can't reduce the required width by more than 1/8 of an inch or 3 millimeters. Reinforcement at the ends is also limited to 1/8 of an inch. And when the end is faired into the base material, the slope cannot exceed 1 in 10. So the takeaway from Section 7.30 isn't really a change in how we remove weld tabs. The major 2025 change is much earlier in the process. AWS now makes weld tabs the explicit default for CJP groove weld joints and provides a defined list of conditions where they aren't required.